Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will begin with chapter 12, verse 2. And one of the most striking things about this week's Parshas Lecha, is it just jumps right in. In other words, we don't have a context of who Avram is. We don't have a context of his accomplishments, of his challenges. All of a sudden, God just appears to Avram and then tells him, you're going to go on a journey. In contrast, by the way, from last week's Parsha, we don't just have God coming to Noach and telling him there's going to be a flood. We introduce Noach. We talk about the fact that he was tzaddik tamim, and it's a whole discussion about what that even means. But here, Hashem just jumps in with Avram, like, what's going on? So really interesting Ramban. We'll start with the Ramban on Pasuk Beis. Actually, we'll skip the first few lines of it, beginning with V'hinei zos haparsha. Ramban on Pasuk Beis. V'hinei zos haparsha lo be'ara kol ha'inyan. This section does not fully describe everything. Why in the world would God say to Avram, leave your land and I'll do for you this great goodness that there was nothing like it before? I mean, why would Avram be getting this message from God? Maybe we should start off by saying that he was a devoted servant of God or a uniquely pious person. Maybe we should explain why Avram should leave the land. Like God comes to Avram, leave the land. Why? What's wrong with the land? Let's assume Avram is absolutely appropriate for this being chosen by God. But why should he leave? That there's something fundamentally so good about his going to a different land. V'sishma v'koli v'eitiva imach kasher b'David u'b'Shlomo ki natorah kulam b'chukosai teleichim shemot tishma b'kol Hashem Elokecha u'b'yitzchak amim b'avur Avram avdi avol avticho b'avur yitzias ha'aretz ein bo tam. It's very interesting. In other words, the Ramban says, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't raise the question in the Ramban's mind why Hashem says to Avram, you got to go. But he tells various people, you've got to walk with me. He tells various people, walk with me, do this with me, that. But here there's no concept. It's all about where he's going. It's not about going with God. It's a very interesting thing. And why should that be? And what's so bad about where he is? And what's so good about where he's going? And what's so good about Avram in the first place? Aval atam, but the reason is, says the Ramban, asu anshe ur kastem imo ra'os rabos ala munasaba kadosh baruch hu. Like the famous midrashim that presumably we've all heard many times, and our children might be shocked, are not the first 25% of Parshas Lecha, but the whole story with Ur-Kasdim, where the people of Ur-Kasdim were very bad to Avram because he believed in God. V'barach mehem l'lechas artza Canaan. He fled from them. He went to the land of Canaan. V'nis akiv b'Charan, and he sort of remained in Charan. Amar lo lazov gam elu. So the Ramban says that Hashem says to Abraham, keep on going. You haven't gone far enough. You left those people in Ur-Kasdim, and now you've gone to Charan, but keep on moving. Your initial instinct was correct. You have a special journey. You have a special mission. Go. You'll serve Hashem in a special land. V'sham yigdal shmo v'yisparchu bo ha'goyim ha'heim, and you'll glorify God's name, and the nations of that land will be inspired and honored by Avram. Lo kasher asu imo Ur-Kasdim shoy mevazim u'mekalim oso, not like what happened in Ur-Kasdim, that they degraded him. V'samo so beboro b'kivshon, whichever version of the Medrash you say, they threw him in a pit, they threw him in a furnace. V'amar lo shivarich mevarchav v'imyachim mekalo you are v'zet tam haparsha. And then God also adds, he says, those who bless you will be blessed, those who curse you will be cursed. So the Ramban is explaining that there was a story that Avram already demonstrated great devotion to the concept of monotheism, and that he was having terrible sorrows from the people who lived there with him, and he already left. And so that's why there's not this whole introduction, because God is coming in context. You clearly are a servant of God. You clearly had the right idea about leaving, but you haven't gone far enough. So it's a fascinating thing to think about. It's not just get away from those people. It's that you have something great to go to. Now, that's all great. And I'm sure what you're all wondering to yourselves is, really good answer. Wouldn't it make sense if the Torah told us all that? Right? I mean, it makes sense if you assume all of this. Says the Ramban, "Aval Torah lo sirtza laharich b'deos of the avodah zarah ulefarish ha'inyan shai beino ve'nakastim be'amuna kasher katzor be'inyan dor enosh usforasam b'avodah zarah shechitsha." So he says the reason is we're really not interested in getting into Avram's theological debates with the people of Ur-Kasdim. And we're really not interested in getting into the challenges of Avodah Zarah in the land of Ur-Kasdim. And the Ramban says this is not even the first place in the Chumash like this, because when it talks about Enosh, it sort of alludes to the fact that Enosh got involved in Avodah Zarah, but it doesn't do more than that. I'll tell you, I don't know if this is the exact intent of the Ramban or how the Ramban understands the intent of Hashem, but just to give you a mashal for a moment, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been to a talk sometimes. Sometimes people spend so much time in their talk getting you involved in their great questions and how everything is so difficult to understand. And then they run out of time and they spend 45 minutes on dramatically conveying all their difficulties on whatever topic. And they spend 5 minutes giving an answer. And you kind of walk out of there like being more clear about the question than the answer. And lahavdol, the Torah is a very sacred thing. The Torah doesn't have to dray around with who knows what they were doing in Ur-Kasdim. That's the Ramban's explanation. Interesting thing to think about. Okay, let's now go on. So God has told them all these assurances, as the Ramban alluded to. And Avram goes. He goes with Sarai and Lot. Lot is his nephew, and whatever possessions they have, and whatever people they've touched in Haran, and they're on their way to Canaan. And now in verse 6, chapter 12, verse 6, Vayavor Avram ba'aretz ad mekom Shechem. Avram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, ad Elon Moreh, to the place known as Elon Moreh, Bakdani, Az ba'aretz. And at that time, the Canaanim were in the land. There is a famous Ramban over here, the first Ramban in Pasuk Vav. Vayavor Avram ba'aretz ad mekom Shechem. Omar loch klal. I want to tell you a general rule. You need to reflect on this general concept in all of the coming stories of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's a major idea. Our rabbis refer to it in a brief way. The Amru, everything that has occurred to the patriarchs is a sign for their descendants. You know, you could very well ask the question in various places and say for Bereshis, what does it matter where Avram went? I mean, I get it. I appreciate where he went from and where he was going to. Does it matter to me that he went until Shechem or Elon Moreh? I don't know. Just let me know when he got to the ultimate destination. And then we have all of these things about, later on, there's going to be stories about digging wells. More than one person is going to be digging wells. What's this all about? And the Ramban says other things also. When you read these psukim, these seem like totally extraneous things that are not essential to be conveyed in the Torah. All of these things, all of these psukim are there to teach about the future. Because when any of these events, seemingly mundane things, occur to the patriarchs, they understand that there's a sign for this, for what will happen for their offspring. And that's the idea of Masa Avos Simon Labanim, that which occurred to the patriarchs is a sign of what will happen to their children. V'da, Kigog Zeras Irin Kasher Tetzim B'Kol Gzera Apol Dimyon, Tiagzera Miskayemes Al Kol Panim. Generally speaking, when there's a decree from God, when it goes from a concept until something actually that occurs, then it's really cemented. V'lochein, Yasu Anaviyim Ma'aseh B'Nevuos K'Mamer Yirmiyahu, Shetziva L'Baruch V'Yak Chaloschal L'Kros Divrei HaSefer Hazeh Tikshor Lav Even V'Yishlachato El Toch Paras V'Yomarto Kacha Tishka B'Chol. He brings various proofs now from different Nevi'im, which we'll skip the next few lines, but that not only is a prophecy conveyed to a Navi, but they do something, or they tell someone to do something. Because when they do something, it cements that this is indeed going to happen. Skipping a few lines now. God laid out for Avram various things that would represent things that would happen to his descendants. v'havenza, and understand this. So the Ramban goes through now different representations here. I think we did it in a past year, so I wanna keep on moving for now. But that's just a good idea to think about in this Ramban and to be aware of this idea of Maseh V'Simul Lebanim, and it's very helpful when looking at the psukim of these parshios. Verse 8. Vayatek Mishamahara, and he left from there towards the mountain. Mikedim Beis El, Vayeta Alo, to the east of Beis El, and he pitched his tent. Beis El Miyam V'Hoai Mikedim, Vayivan Sham Mizbeach Lashem. Avram built a altar to God there. Vayikra B'Shem Hashem, and he called out in the name of God. What do those three words mean? He called out in the name of God. What did he say? To whom did he say it? What is it? What does it mean? Ramban on Pasuk Ches, Vayikra B'Shem Hashem. Piresh Unklis, Shispalo Hashem. The Unklis says that the pshat is he davened there. It just means he davened Hashem. Built an altar, and davened Hashem. Va'anachon, the Ramban says, I think the pshat is Shayakore b'kol gadol sham l'fnei mizbeach as Shem Hashem, that he called out with a great voice there by the altar the name of God, meaning Modia oso ve'elokuso l'fnei adam. He taught people about God and his godliness. Ki be'ur kastim hayamalamdam. When he was in Ur Kasdim, where he got into all these problems, he tried to teach people about God. V'lo avu shmoa, and they weren't interested in listening to him. V'ata kishabah b'aretz hazos shehuftach ba v'avrocha b'varechecha haya lamud l'lamed v'lefarsim v'lekus. So now he gets to the land of Israel, and so now he realizes this is what I've wanted to do. This is what I was doing, and it wasn't working. And he calls out in the name of God, meaning he started a kiruv organization to teach people, but really to teach people about God. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Yitzchak also builds an altar and calls on the name of God. It's particularly meaningful because people frequently ask about why it doesn't say more about what Yitzchak did. Says the Ramban, and that's those three words, means he also was teaching people about God. They had come to a new place. That the people hadn't heard of God. And hadn't seen his glory. And in those places, to those people, he taught of the greatness of God. By Yaakov it never says Vayikra B'Shem Hashem. Rabim Kulam of the Hashem, because he had this whole big family, and they all were servants of God. They were a major entity in their region, and they all believed in God, and so there was a lot of hearing about God just from seeing what these people were doing. Everybody knew about the Jewish God. So he says two things. First of all, he didn't have to, advertise. He had a big family, and they all were serving God. There were a lot of people exposed just by their lives. But the other thing is, he was the third generation. There had been a lot of advertising up until this point. But the bottom line is what the Ramban says, both Avram and Yitzchak did, is that they called the name of God, meaning they taught people about Hashem. So we discussed this morning the Ramban's perspective on sort of just the jump beginning of the parsha. We discussed the Ramban with Maseh V'Simul Lebanim. We discussed the Unklis and Ramban regarding what it means to call in the name of God.